Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Noxcast, your Equinox News Recap podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Hope. I'm the managing executive editor of the Equinox.
And I'm Chloe Erno, the news editor.
And welcome back to another installment of your news recap for the week. We got some exciting stuff to get into in terms of stories, and as always, kind of a balance, taking the good with the bad. To start us off here, just getting right into it. The top story news was meeting coverage recap of what happened at the first student assembly meeting back of this semester. So KSC Dining's leadership team came and gave their remarks about a few different topics, mainly the responses to the survey that they sent out last semester, which saw apparently a very high response rate about satisfaction with meal plans and things like that. They also talked about certain changes and what they want to do with their food offerings. And there was some questions. I'm also on student assembly, so I did ask a couple of these questions. Full disclosure. But, talking about some of the maybe less desirable changes that we also saw going into this semester, such as Hoot and Scoot, and by extension, the Sizzler, being open for less days. I think it's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday now. And then Starbucks within Lloyd's being closed on the weekends. So it's kind of part of the larger discussion about like paring down or like scaling back the hours for these like locations and sort of, again, reemphasizing on the dining commons, which we've talked about at length in various other articles and, in an editorial or two, I think, and how we don't necessarily think, as like an editorial board, that the students are very happy with that shift, even if it might, I guess, from their perspective, make some economic sense to do. There's kind of a lot lost. I mean, everyone, if you say like a single positive thing about dining, it will be the fact that, there's Sizzlers and everyone loves them. And so like scaling that back, and even though, with the promotion of like, for instance, Sizzler Josh had like a managerial role in Lloyd's. Like, obviously that's good for him and good that he gets that experience and well deserved. But then at the same time, it's just like the previous location, sort of scaling back on that. So there were some questions, and it got a little bit, I don't want to say contentious, but it got a little bit, inquisitive as to why these occurred. And, I personally appreciate the fact that they are willing to talk and be transparent about things, even if it's not the easiest topics to discuss. So I appreciate the fact that they came. But I think it's just important that people know what they're sort of telling the campus.
Yeah, and I got to sit in for the first couple of minutes of that assembly meeting because I took a couple of the pictures. And I'm, of course, very happy as well they can engage in these discussions with us. I think that's very good to be transparent about these issues. But I also think that it just sucks, like, for us as the students to be losing these resources that we've relied on. And especially with the Sizzler, I know that's one of the best places on campus to go get food. It repeatedly has very quality food there compared to the other locations. And I just think that cutting down those hours like that is disappointing. The same for Starbucks. I know that students really do love that and having that on campus. And it's just sad to see the hours get cut down to where less people can utilize them.
Yeah, and then in addition to Dining's remarks and their taking questions, there was also some news about there was a new student senator elected. So first year student assembly representative Colin Linderman, I believe, was elected to a student senate seat. So that's good news. There's also some discussion about a resolution that was put forward. It wasn't put forward for a vote yet, but setting in stone the rule that's kind of been like an informal rule for student org budgeting for a while, which is half of what's paid for the organization basically has to provide half of what you pay for apparel. This doesn't count like giveaway items such as like shirts. So they're looking to more concretely put that in place. But I just felt the need to also bring that up in terms of the recap on that story. But it was a good job by our staffer Sam again on condensing that and making it digestible for the audience, I think. But with that being said, let's move into our top story in Region State this week, which comes to us from New Hampshire Public Radio's Olivia Richardson, and this talks about a study that showed that New Hampshire's measles vaccination rate is lower than that of its New England neighbors. I don't want to like I don't mean to bring this up or and I don't think this the author of this story means to make anyone like alarmed necessarily or immediately think that anyone's in danger. Obviously, we're still at a decent spot, and it's just something to think about because New Hampshire kind of politically is one of the more libertarian leaning states, I guess, where there's kind of like a sense of we don't want the government to impose things upon us, even if it is for the public health and things like that. So it's kind of expected, from my position to like see a story like this where we're kind of lagging behind in this respect. But I do think it is also obviously unfortunate that the federal government and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as secretary has kind of normalized the anti-vaccine sentiment, and kind of we're gonna potentially keep seeing more and more issues and maybe certain isolated cases of this disease, which we kind of did almost or nearly completely eradicate, at least in the United States, a while ago. So not really the best news, but it's something that I think everyone should keep in mind and do the obvious thing and make sure that you're up to date on your vaccinations.
Yeah, and to second what you said, I'm not really surprised by it, especially with the political leanings in this state. I mean, even compared to where I live in Connecticut, I feel like it's definitely more right-leaning where we are here. But it does really set just a really sad precedent going forward for the country, especially in regards to just the anti-vaccine movement, what's going on in the federal government. And I think it's good to draw attention to it and to paint that in a negative light because it does put people's lives in danger and it does endanger our greater community. So it's good to just get it out there.
Right, yeah. So I would encourage folks to read this article. There's some good quotes in here from some reputable doctors who talk about why this is something to be concerned about, something to think about. So good piece from NHPR, I thought, and that's why I chose it as the top story in that section. But with that being said, let's get back into our own content here with the student life top story, which comes to us from our staffer, Tammy, actually. And this is event coverage of the winter celebration event, which the Equinox tabled at. And so this is the annual event that is the beginning of the spring semester each year, put on by the Office of Student Involvement, where student organizations get to table and tell folks about, what they do and try to get folks to join their organization. Usually tables offer interactive activities or some sort of freebies or giveaways to incentivize people to either sign up or come to a meeting or whatever it may be. But it is a very prominent event. It's, one of the Keene State traditions in terms of, reoccurring things that happen on campus. There's some really nice pictures that accompany in this article from our webmaster, Charlotte. So she's been sort of experimenting with photography a little bit. So I thought that was cool to see. But, I was tabling there for basically the whole time. I usually table the whole time at whatever events there are for recruitment. And it wasn't super high turnout, but it was still good to just like hang out and see folks walk by and, just be around the, people that I work with on a weekly basis here and sort of just, talk about why we like the Equinox so much, talk about why people should give it a shot or, come to a meeting, and, just get like even like a few signups, I think is good enough.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I wasn't able to table that day because I had back-to-back meetings for my article that week, but I did attend my freshman year, and I remember really loving it with my friends. And I think it's just great to like get the clubs out there and to give incoming students and even older students an opportunity to see their resources here and to see what they can join, to see what they can write for. And it's just an opportunity to meet new people and to have these opportunities in front of them.
Yeah, and I also think that, with any events like this where it's, revolving around organizations tabling and presenting what they do and trying to interact with the community, I just would encourage people. I see a lot of things just like personally from folks who say that, they have issues with like not finding friends or community in college. It is hard. at first, and it doesn't always immediately like resolve itself that you like are able to find the group of people that you would consider friends. So I think going to events like this and just like going up to whatever tables might even potentially interest you is like super important in order to find that community, because organizations are there because they want to see you, they want to interact with people who are willing to take that step and really get involved, because we can't do what we do, not just at the Equinox but any organization, without the involvement and people taking that step, and saying that they want to do this.
Yeah, and we've done other tabling events as well that I've attended, and it's always nice just talking to people. I think just seeing faces to put behind the organizations is a really good thing, and being able to speak to them, show them the sign up sheet, give them a couple stickers, and it really does incite their interest in it. And even just attending one meeting and just seeing what it's all about is a benefit to us overall.
Right, yeah. So nice little event coverage from our staffer again, Tammy. So thank you for that. And moving on now to our editorial, which was an idea that I had been kind of stewing on. I think about it, whenever a weather event happens on campus. We're in New England, and so snowstorms happen a lot. There's issues with ice, on walkways and things like that. So it's not anything we're strangers to, especially if you're from the area already growing up. But I feel like there's been misdirected anger, and I think the board kind of shared this sentiment toward the workers themselves, who have been trying their best to clear up everything. I know by the time that this comes out and while we're recording that like things are in a way better spot, like things are pretty much cleared to the most reasonable extent that they could at this point. And so it's not as much of an issue now as it was before or in the immediate aftermath of the storm. But, just sort of pointing the finger at the wrong channels and not knowing how to properly communicate a complaint you might have, or a path you want to see cleared that isn't cleared, or something that's a little bit slippery or dangerous that you want to voice. Because, I've spoken with Joe Britton, the grounds supervisor, a few times for various articles, and he's one of the nicest guys I've ever interviewed. He's truly like responsive and will be very honest and transparent about like what he does. He's very hardworking. He talks all the time about how he gets up bright and early in the morning, make sure that his team, to the capacity that he's able to, is assisting in these cleanup operations. And so the reason why that they're not able to be done as orderly is, again, this is sort of a direct result of when you talk about budget cuts and paring down numbers of staff and hours, they're not able to as efficiently do their job. And so that's kind of just out of his control. And so if there is anyone to complain about, it would be the higher ups above grounds. And then furthermore, back to the state legislators who initiated the cuts in the first place, because it's not just, in the classroom that you see the impacts of this. It's also, when you're walking to campus and a huge snowstorm hit like a few days ago and things aren't as cleaned up as they really should be. But, it's not anything that's because of the grounds crew.
Yeah, and we had a similar topic for one of the news articles this past week, but I also got to talk to Joe Burton and Catherine Bain, and he spoke on how they do want the criticism. Like, they want you to reach out and to mention any issues and to not feel nervous about just telling them about something, because they can't fix it if they don't know that there's an issue to begin with. And I definitely agree that a lot of the student anger is very misplaced. They're clearly doing the best that they can at their capacity, and with the fact that students are always going to be moving around on campus and there's going to be cars everywhere, and there's really only so much you can do with that limitation, and with the fact that their budget is getting smaller and smaller each year.
Right, yeah. And, talking also about like within dorms and campus buildings, when you have issues with facilities and like pipes and things like that, as a result of weather events like this again, it's, deferred maintenance issues, and things aren't as able to be tended to as quickly as one might hope, because again, it's, a matter of lack of staff and lack of hours that are needed to cover everything. It's, it is a small campus, but, in the scheme of certain things, it is still a lot to cover at once. And so thinking about, the actual sort of reasons for why this is, and I think it's just important because, in our editorials, we always voice our concerns and make sure that the student voice is heard. And so, when you're talking about, directing anger at, the wrong sources, it can kind of water down the student voice and make it seem like you're just kind of being unreasonable. And folks will be less likely to listen to you perhaps in the future. And so I think it's just important to be more thoughtful and responsible with where we're directing that and to know the source of these issues. With that being said, I'd like to move on to our A&E top story this week, which comes to us from our staffer May. And this was about Bricolage Literary Journal winning an award for through the National Council for Teachers of English, which is an organization that has award opportunities for literary journals such as Bricolage. And so really exciting news for them, having, just come back with their first publication in years last year, which I do have a copy of, and being able to immediately become also an award-winning literary journal in addition to just being one in the first place, which they weren't for a few years after having gone dormant as an organization. So really good news and really happy for them.
Yeah, and when it comes to these sort of events, it's not always about placing or winning an award, but I think for them it was definitely such a great thing. And we know we've been to events, we've gotten awards, but it's just very nice to have that on your resume and being able to say that you are an award-winning organization.
Right, and then just displaying Keene State on a higher level and really elevating the wonderful things that our students are doing through student organizations and various activities around campus is it benefits the college in the long run. And so I know that they have a lot of folks on their year board who are seniors and unfortunately graduating at the end of the year. So I think if you're interested at all in creative writing or photography or art or things like that, I mean, if you're listening to this podcast and you're interested in the Equinox, then I think probably give Bricolage a shot too. I mean we've worked with them for Media Org Manus and things like that, so I think it's really important to see them keep going. I really do want to make sure that they kind of have that presence on campus going forward as well. So shout out to them. But with that, we can move on to our sports top story, which is another positive story. This one is about kind of a big milestone, which is Moon's basketball head coach Keith Boucher, who got his 500th win very recently, I think last week or the week previous. But it's a big achievement, and he's one of the folks in the athletics program who's been around by far the longest. I think in recent years we've kind of been seeing a lot of these folks who have been coaching for 20, 30 years plus really taking like retirements. I know field hockey head coach retired last season, so you're kind of having less and less of these folks who've been around as long as they have and have seen the college through various eras. But he has, and it was a really good story by our photo editor Xander, who hasn't really typically written sports before, so I was glad to see that he was able to put together such a good piece. And it's kind of funny talking about how he didn't even know it was his 500th at the end of the game when they won. He knew it was like around that number, but didn't know for sure, and so he was going to walk off the court, and then they had to tell him to get back. And then also there's a nice little tie-in too, because former President Melinda Treadwell was a player on the women's basketball team back when she went to school here, and so Keith Boucher coached her, and he said he's the only coach who could say that they taught soon to be or later on to be president of the college. So that's a cool little tidbit as well.
Yeah, and I think it's really great to see that people who have been on this campus for so long and who have seen all these different generations grow up are getting that kind of recognition and being able to talk on it themselves. And the fact that Linda Treadwell was coached by him is so crazy to me as someone who's spoken to Treadwell multiple times, and it's just nice to see her brought up in a way again after her departure from campus. And it's a very great thing to me, I think.
Yeah, and she also did film a sort of personalized, like, little cell phone video to congratulate him on his 500th win as well that the athletics department posted. I thought that was nice as well to see, for sure. And yeah, just, good news all around. I think he also had a quote in here about, talking about, oh, potentially are you even like thinking about retirement? And he's like, what would I do if I retired? Just watch ESPN all day or something like that. So I thought that was funny. I haven't spoken with him personally, but I have heard, in interviews that he's very talkative guy and very passionate. So it's something that I appreciate in interviewees. So happy for him. But with that being said, we are wrapped up with this news recap, and as always, I would like to extend a special shout out to the composer of the music for Noxcast, our very own Equinox alum Zach Keenan, the creator of the graphic for Noxcast, our very own art director Elijah Fisher, and the editor of Noxcast, our very own multimedia director Noelle Hisgen. Until next time, thanks for tuning in, and